Okay, I think we're a minute in, so this webinar is only 30 minutes long, so let's go ahead and kick it off. Welcome to Coaching Conversations, Making the Most of Every Teachable Moment. My name is Jeremy Heflin, and I will be your host today. So a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. This meeting is being recorded and all audience members are muted. Please ask questions, though. We encourage you to do that using the Q&A feature within your Zoom platform. I do have a couple of wonderful colleagues on this call that will be helping to answer questions throughout the presentation. And we will also be answering questions at the end of the presentation. And you will also receive a copy of this presentation via email. We've linked to some resources that we hope you will find valuable. And so we'll be sure to share that out afterwards. And with that, it is my pleasure to welcome our guest speaker today. Her name is Larissa Wright-Elson. She's from Anchorage School District in Alaska. She joins us with over 17 years of teaching experience in the classroom. And she is currently the Language Arts Curriculum Coordinator, where she supports other teachers and has been in this role for the past 4 years. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Larissa.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Nice to see all of you. Thank you so much for coming. So today we are talking about coaching conversations with students and their writing. I'm mostly going to be speaking from the perspective of a high school language arts teacher, and I know that, or English teacher, but I know that's not everybody who's here. And so when I can, I'll definitely be making some connections to college level teaching too. So in my 17 years in the classroom, most of that time I taught writing classes like AP language, and then also general English classes, which really integrated literature and language so that students were writing as readers and reading as writers. In order to show that we don't just read and we don't just write, everything kind of comes together. So our first main topic of conversation is about scheduling. So I think it's really important to notice right from the beginning of the school year as best you can, because it doesn't always happen this way. Although I do know that typically college professors are quite a bit more organized maybe than your average high school English teacher. Is to really kind of get a big picture for what the whole school is going to look like. We have standards, every state has standards that can help with planning purposes. And so those standards can then become some of those writing goals. Often you'll see with Common Core standards in particular that those are rewritten for students as I can statements. And that was some work that we did in my AP language class as well, that we took not only what the standards were for 11th grade English classes, but also the skills that were needed in order to be successful in the course and on the AP exam at the end of the year for each of those essay types. We kind of broke those out into I can statements to give students a little bit more support for where they needed to be. And then we could use those and create scaffolds within them to help students meet those expectations of the standards for the year. Kind of knowing where students need to be by the end of the year is helpful, not just for you, but also for the kids so that they can work on a little bit of self-monitoring. And typically high school students and college students can do that at least to a certain degree, depending on the student. We used those assignments and the rubrics and really connected them together so that every time there was an assignment that went out, there was a rubric that was almost immediately attached to it. I tended to fall back both on the AP rubrics, and I revised them for my younger students so that it created a little bit more access later on into an AP class if they chose to use to take one. Um, but also the standards aligned rubrics that were available from Turnitin. And then we unpacked those rubrics so students really knew exactly what it was that they were expected to do in order to show that they were um, proficient or otherwise successful in on that specific assignment. And then I just kind of like, I like everything in groups. And those groups sometimes were changed up a little bit from one quarter to the next or one semester to the next. Uh, but assigning things to a group, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment too. But if I knew the number of groups, which is basically just based on the number of students in class, and I like a group size of about 3 to 5 students, then I knew for each essay how much, which, how many groups could get really specific feedback on their essay. Because this is really about kind of having those coaching conversations, but also about lightening the load a little bit more for teachers. um, that there's always time for feedback, but you can give more intensive feedback to a smaller number of students and then kind of keep rotating them through as you go. So knowing how they were going to get graded, knowing what exactly the assignment was, and then knowing whether or not they were going to get more specific feedback was really very helpful. And then I could choose where to really give more robust feedback along the way, targeting those specific standards or that specific essay type or a combination of those. Um, and I would give feedback just to maybe 2 or 3 groups, like very specific, more intense feedback, and then go a little lighter or rely a little bit more on peer review and peer feedback with the other groups, and keep rotating so that students knew where they were on that schedule. I would still read every single paper. I think that's absolutely essential, not only to look for, potential red flags and mental health issues, but also just to have an understanding of how my students were developing as writers, and then could give a little bit more basic feedback. With this process, it's a little scary to students sometimes, and also a little bit for parents. They want to see these marked up papers. Then students always had the option of scheduling additional time. You can use something like You Can Book Me, and embed that link in your website or in the signature of your email, or have it as a QR code up on your wall of your office or your classroom, so students know that they can schedule specific time that is just for them, in order to get additional feedback beyond what they got in their small group. Or if they didn't get targeted feedback that time, but they want to be able to go over it with you, they know that that's an option, that it's not, you get feedback and you don't. It's I need it now, because they're growing as writers and as readers, and as students who can manage their own time and their own learning goals. So those were my workarounds, and it tended to work pretty well. It was a little intimidating at first, but there are lots of opportunities. Okay. So then when it comes to delivering feedback, there was that, I'm going to kind of skip down those bullet points and kind of continue from where I just left off, that you really are creating space for individual appointments. And that could even mean something that is more low tech, like here's where my lunch period is, and here's what I typically do. Here are my office hours or my prep periods. Here's when I arrive at the beginning of the day and when I leave. So students could kind of stop in for a few minutes. If they didn't need to have 15 or 30 minutes of my time, then they could stop by and have a conversation about what they did on that assignment, what they felt like they accomplished, and where they felt like maybe they still needed additional support. The most important thing in order to make this work, because you're relying a little bit more on having uh, review one another's assignments, and that can be kind of intimidating. And often in high school, there's a little bit of a popularity component to it as well, and not wanting to upset certain students. Turnitin is wonderful because you can make some of that work anonymous. But if you spend a little bit more time upfront creating a really consistent classroom culture, not just for those small groups that are going to be working together more intensely, but for the classroom environment overall, that's really helpful. And we used things like breakout boxes and other sort of puzzle things that were sort of connected to the curriculum, but didn't have to be, because it was really about students learning some uh, collaboration and problem solving skills. Any sort of group project with clear expectations, because I know group projects get a bad rap, but having those parameters in there is helpful for students and learning how to navigate some of the social expectations of group work. And then my biggest fallback was really discussion, both whole class Socratic seminars where everyone's learning one another's personalities, and then small groups for Socratic seminar coaching, so small group discussion. Another great way to do this as students are really learning to deliver feedback to one another is to use sample essays, and they can be essays from prior years with names taken off. They can be an essay that you write yourself, or if your curriculum or other supplemental materials have exemplars, then those can be really useful as well. And that takes a little bit of the risk away from it of upsetting peers, and students can learn how to give focused and constructive feedback rather than going through and just marking every, spelling mistake that they still see or everything that they just don't like. Um, when students are giving peer feedback, it's really helpful to use those very specific questions that are available in the peer review. You can write them yourself, or you can use what's available in order to have the peers hone in on what is the most important standard to hit or expectations to look at in that essay, instead of kind of going all over or giving very general feedback like, oh, yeah, your essay was good. What does that mean? How was it good? What did you like? You can ask questions about transitions or the thesis statement, or the examples that are used, or the specific evidence. And that is not only a valuable experience for the recipient of that feedback, but also for the students who are giving the feedback, because often the nature of it encourages them to reflect on what it is that they produced for that same assignment. So if they're noticing in the essay that they read that the transitions could be more clear or stronger, then they might think, I really should make some of those changes to my own essay as well. Um, and then anything that can be engaging, I think this year has been a really interesting one for student engagement. Sometimes that you can create engaging kinds of activities with the tools that might have previously just been a little bit more dry or static, like a rubric. And so treating rubrics like puzzles and doing relatively simple things like unpacking them and ensuring that everybody understands all of the different components, searching for examples of published essays that meet some of those expectations that are on your rubric, are always to engage students a little bit further. And I think one of the most engaging things ever in a class, whether it goes well, and so students feel more supported and successful, or whether it goes awry and everyone has a horror story about a group assignment, is to really have students work in groups, because that helps with some of the social aspects of why people like taking face-to-face classes and how that works. Um, and then one of the simplest tools is really just that kind of single point rubric or the glows and grows, and you can create that rubric as well and turn it in. Here's what went really well. And I used to like to just talk and have all of my comments recorded. This is what I really loved about your paper. These are the areas where I think you've got a little bit more growth, and let's see how you can apply both those glows and those grows to your next assignment. Because if you can tell, really like talking to people, and I love to sit down with students and talk to them more about the work that they're doing in class and have a conversation rather than just writing feedback on a paper. Okay. So I've talked a lot about the rubrics. I'm a big fan of rubrics. I like the predictability of them. I like that they take some of the mystery out of how you get graded, or how your essay scores. One of the most frustrating things I ever find about being a teacher is when students say, "This is the grade that you gave me," rather than framing it as the grade that they earned according to the rubric. And so those were part of those rubric conversations that I had with students as well, so that it was just really clear and then the pathways clear. And then the assignments themselves, you can build them up in chunks so that they feel more successful and supported as they go. I love the similarity report. And I always have it encourage other teachers to have it turned on immediately for students so that they can see what their overall percentage is. And I tried to use it in a couple of different ways, not only for them to see like, ooh, I missed a citation here. This area has a little bit of trouble. Um, because I don't like those gotcha moments. I like using Turnitin as a tool for the whole of the writing process. But then I would intentionally kind of make sure that it would flag anything that was in quotes, because I was working with high school students on ensuring that they incorporated quotes from literature or from resources in their or sources on their research papers. And so I wanted them to be able to see where those were so that they could ensure that they had kind of the right number of quotes that the rubric asks them to provide in their essays or their research papers. That's something that can definitely be done in groups as well, and kind of unpacking what that similarity report looks like with one another to help keep them all on track. Um, and then if they're working on those collaboratively in a group, they have an opportunity to cross-check, or if something gets flagged, they can, instead of being concerned that I have caught them plagiarizing, they can show it to a peer and get again that assurance that, hey, this 1%, that's nothing. Oh, look, it's a quote from, the sun also rises. It's a quote from your source. You don't have to worry about it. Or it's another student paper that's in the system. That doesn't mean she's going to think that you copied it. It just means, that you're students and you're learning the research process. And so you have sources that are similar to what other students would have used. I love those peer mark assignments because of that reflection aspect to them. And then I really encourage teachers then to have an additional paper assignment, that one in which, can include the revisions that students have come up with in between their drafts, and show perhaps where they have applied those initial glows and grows, or the glows and grows from their last essay, in order to be able to support. Um, the writing process overall, that it's not just, I wrote this essay, it's done, I'm not going to learn anything else from it other than that content, but really help support them in learning about the writing process. And I think that's what Turnitin does so well, both with all of the standard tools and then also with Draft Coach, so that students can get additional support along the way and get some feedback. It used to be that my favorite thing, my favorite aspect of Turnitin was the e-rater, because I wanted to not have to go through and circle all kinds of things on their papers to get them to clean it up. And now there are so many tools that can help students, so that as the educators, we can help them hone in on what is the most essential. Are you communicating effectively? Are you, is your line of reasoning all in check? Do we feel something when we read your essay? All of those, I think, are the reasons why we all got into education, not just marking up papers.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Larissa, for sharing your insights and experiences with us. I did see a question come through during the webinar about if we were going to cover Draft Coach, and the good news is we are. So I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes talking about Draft Coach for those of you that don't know what this new tool is, and then we'll hop into Q&A. So what is Turnitin Draft Coach? Turnitin Draft Coach is a tool that helps students ensure original work and proper citation by giving students real-time formative feedback directly where they are writing in Google Docs. So what's really cool about this is that students can check their work for any similarities against the world's biggest collection of internet, student paper, and academic journal content, and then make any necessary revisions prior to that final submission. So ultimately, this is helping students become more independent learners and confident writers. And I did want to highlight here that it's important to note that Draft Coach will also be available for Microsoft Word on the web very soon. Draft Coach goes beyond just a simple check, though. Its rich feedback helps students learn the underlying concepts in order to master those research and writing skills. So there's in-depth instruction about how to address issues surfaced by similarity and citation checking, which, as Larissa mentioned, we hope to will reinforce like some of those feedback conversations that you're already having with your students. And then to help students get the most out of Draft Coach, there's also tips on how to use the tool according to personal writing and editing preferences. So we hope this feature will help encourage students to initiate even more conversations with their teachers as part of the learning process. And Turnitin Draft Coach is currently available to anyone who has a Turnitin Feedback Studio or Turnitin Originality license. If you're interested in learning more, simply type go.turnitin.com/draft coach in your browser and fill out a form, and we will be in touch with you to help you get that set up. So with that, we have about 5 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A panel. But we do have a couple that have already come through. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you one of these, Larissa. So how do you manage multiple revisions if students need them?
I think some of that it is really just sort of the overall organization of your classroom, and have one of the best ways, or most successful ways that I've done it is by having students write in chunks over time. And remember, this is with high school students. This works especially well with freshmen and sophomores who are still working on writing a comprehensible paragraph, never mind a whole essay. So by chunking things out and starting with the sentence, and I do like these days using some of that work by Judith Hockman. So working on sentences first, and this sentence is successful and it communicates its points effectively, moving on to paragraphs, so that as a teacher, I can circulate around the room and I can read what it is that they're writing and give them immediate feedback, rather than having to wait until the end and provide more extensive feedback. Um, if I'm ensuring that what they're completing in class or carrying over into homework is really building to that endpoint of the essay, then that makes it a lot more successful. If the essay or other paper is something that's kind of just tacked on to the end of a unit, that's much harder. And so as I made that shift to those skills, it became a lot easier to give students feedback all along the way, so that by the time I got a multi-paragraph essay, there was less revision that needed to take place. It might have been more about transitions or line of reasoning or overall organization, rather than like, I don't understand what it is that you're trying to communicate here, because they've already worked on those skills.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good tips. So the next question is, what if students need significantly more assistance in meeting the expectations of the assignment?
So quite a bit of that I tried to schedule within the class period. So um, for kids who need additional help, it's hard on them to have to come in at lunch every day, and a lot of students who are struggling are not the students who typically hang out in a teacher's classroom at lunch, right? So by scheduling that time in, if in small groups they are working on other tasks, having small group discussions, or even like other problem solving or reading tasks, then I would schedule like these 10-minute conferences. I try to do that in a subtle manner, so that it seemed like I was scheduling quite a bit. And sometimes I would give more feedback to the kids who were not really struggling, but just to be able to have that conversation, but have larger chunks of time within the class period itself to say, hey, you know, Jeremy, here's where I see you going with this essay. Let's talk about it. Let's read it out loud together. And then have a real, again, like a conversation about it, rather than, this typical, like, red pen or red pencil marked up paper. Um, and that gave me uh, it helped with the sense of community in the classroom. It made me a lot more approachable, I think, to students as well, because they could see that I was really interested in their growth, not just in the grade that they got at the end.
That's great. I think we have time for one more. We have 2 minutes left. So, um, excuse me, what do you do to help your students grow as writers if they are already proficient writers?
So I had that come up several times. Sometimes those like grade level expectations, you have kids who are beyond that, and that's unusual. And you don't want to just say, hey, oh, you did a good job, A plus, A plus. They want to be able. Typically, they want to be able to grow as well, and so what I did is work with that rubric and then with that student to create more specific goals for them. You're doing well as compared to the expectation for a 10th grade English student. What do you want to be able to do as a writer? And often I'd have students who wanted to go into engineering fields. And so we worked a little bit. They would draft their essay in an outline, and we would work a little bit more on some of the public speaking aspects, which might be unusual for engineering students, and be able to tweak things so that the standards were still being met, but everyone didn't need to produce the exact same thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Larissa. We really
Thanks.
appreciate you joining us today. And we hope that all of you enjoyed the session and found it valuable. I know that I did. So thank you again, and hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.